Mark, the Restoration Agriculture Show. Mark is on the road in Santa Fe. I'm sure he'll tell us a little bit about that in a second. I am in the office. You notice something new? I got a clock up there that I moved. So I can turn around, and mainly I want to see the temperature outside. So it's 72 outside right now, and if I turn it around, it's pitch black. So 72 degrees on November 16th at 5:30 in the evening. Anyway, Mark, I'll just turn it over to you. I have a couple announcements. There's one announcement. Tomorrow, we are having the Sustainable Design Masterclass at noon tomorrow. They're going to still be our guests. That wasn't announced earlier in the week. So those of you that were on earlier sessions, that's at noon. You should be able, you got an email about it if you didn't see that. Or there's an announcement on your either the page or your Autonomic Action Team page. The link is to it. If you don't get it, go ahead and send me an email, and I'll just send you the link. Tomorrow we're hearing from a Ugandan farmer named, I think it is Alton. What's his last name, Mark? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Anyway, he is going to talk about moringa and several other things. I don't know anything about him other than that Neil will be interviewing him, and I think he'll be giving some talk. And that's at the normal time they've done it. So this is like the 4th week in a row. Mark did the first one like 3 or 4 weeks ago now. And so that's at noon. And then really cool. I would not normally think this is cool, but I really do. Tomorrow afternoon, our normal session for alternative health concepts, we have a guest speaker that's going to talk about, her name's Denise Steffen. She is a professional shopper. And I don't mean that in a negative way. She a food shopper. She's going to take us through something like your normal supermarket or even a Whole Foods, and she's got video and slides and talk about all the sort of details of how you should understand labeling and what it means to see an organic and a GMO, non-GMO, everything. She's supposedly really excellent at this, and so something fun that you can enjoy going to. So that's tomorrow afternoon. Otherwise, it's yours, Mark.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Wayne, for that. As you guys will recall, those of you who've been on for the past few weeks, we've been talking about succession lately, how systems change through time, how ecological systems change through time. And of course, that succession is driven by disturbance. Disturbance happens and the system responds somehow various different ways. We've talked about those different ways in previous weeks. Last week, we really kind of brought it into how to actually work with succession to imitate the disturbance of a particular vegetation type, imitate that disturbance, and harvest yields from it. We're going to go further into that this week. Last week we talked a little bit about pinyon pine. Okay, Wayne, my slide's not advanced. There we go.
You're on it. Yeah, it's happening.
Here we go. And then just for the fellow who wanted to know about some of the resources that I use, these aren't all of the resources. The big book there, Forest Ecology, is the general outline that I'm following. I'm going to cover everything in that book, Forest Ecology, but I'm doing it in a different order that makes more sense to us as land managers who want to use this in practical application. I'm right now in the heart of pinyon country. This is the general range of pinyon. I'm in New Mexico. I don't exactly know where Santa Fe is. This is my first time to New Mexico, actually. Spent quite a bit of time in Colorado, Utah, but not in California, but not New Mexico. There's the pinyon pine, right? Yes.
It's kind of central and pretty close to Colorado. So
right up in
yes,
there?
about there.
Okay.
All right, yeah.
All right, cool. All right, and so we are surrounded by pinyon pine. I just took this today, and what I like about this is not a lot of people have seen pine nuts, unless you're from this region, right on the tree. They actually are in a hard little shell, just like most other nuts, and they have to be cracked out. So there's one there, there's one there. One of the interesting things about here, it's higher elevation. It's obviously drier, only about 15 inches of rain per year. Whenever you have a species that's in a more challenging environment for it, the trees are generally smaller. So around here, the pinyon pines generally aren't getting much more than 10, 15 feet at the tallest. They can get larger. Tonight we're going to talk about this particular region right here. If here's our pinyon pines, what I want you guys to see is this spot right over here, California, overlaps with this range right here. This is the range of sugar pine. Sugar pine is the tallest of the 5-needle pines. And of course, it went all the way down through here, through California. So there's certain places in California, Nevada, where you can plant both sugar pine and pinyon pine to kind of have a little bit of a diversity in your system if you're going to have a system based around that particular forest type. And another thing that I just want to add here for kicks is that green spot right there. It's not native to the region, but it will grow there, and that's the Italian pine. I've just seen an Italian pine, probably 2.5, almost 3 feet diameter. It was only about 30 or 40 foot tall, so it's very old, very short because it was in a stressed environment. Grown right smack dab in the center of a parking lot and pushing up the pavement all around it. So incredibly drought tolerant. So what we see here is we now have this triple overlap of pines in California, and I'm sure there's probably at least one person from California here. I also oftentimes get accused of talking too much about the humid environments, so we'll talk about some of the more drier environments right now. Sugar pine, largest pine cone on the planet. Seriously, these things will be like 18 inches big. As a little kid, there was a sugar pine cone that my grandmother had hung up above the doorway that went into her bedroom. That was one of my favorite things to look at, was this big, huge, gigantic pine cone. And is what it looks like on the tree. And what I think is super incredible about sugar pine is that the range does overlap with redwoods, and there aren't a lot of economic reasons short-term to plant redwoods, which is kind of a shame because the range of redwoods has contracted extremely. Why not have some sort of incentive to plant them long-term? Those of us who care enough, let's put them in our systems, include them in our systems. How do we cash flow along the way? By doing a restoration agriculture, agroforestry type system, and we'll see some examples tonight of how this is being done. Of course, we mentioned before that when Europeans first got to the redwood country, most of the redwoods, like many and most of the ponderosa pine, had grassy understories. The trees were wide spaced apart. And so what, of course, keeps grass underneath these trees is fire. And this here is a fire scar on this tree. So fire is a regular part of the system, probably just long enough to prevent any of the trees from getting too fire established. And we've seen this picture before as well. Whoops, so there's a fire scar right there. If you look at the fire scar in there, that'll tell you the frequency, the severity, and the intensity of fires for probably 1,000 years, because that tree is at least 1,000, 2,000 years old. So what you can do is go to wherever you are, and if you see fire-scarred trees, even the stump of a tree, you can see fire scars on the stumps of trees. You can tell how frequently fires have happened through time, and so that could tell us how often would be a ecologically sound way to go ahead, say every 3 years, every 5 years, every 10 years. I don't know. You'd look at your area wherever you are to find out your fire frequency, and that's a perfectly okay period of time to go and mow, to do an approximation of what a fire would do, remove a whole bunch of the biomass and favor the grassy understory. Those of you who are in areas where controlled burning is allowed, go ahead, hire a professional to do that. Or if you are in a more humid area and they have the tools like dragon flame weeders and so on like that, you can go ahead and use those tools. But mowing is a reasonable approximation for fire. Without the fire, without that periodic disturbance, of course, the understory grows up. Understory in redwoods oftentimes was sugar pine, which is fire tolerant, but more frequently it would be Douglas firs, white fir, various different very flammable trees that are shade tolerant as well. Western hemlock would grow up underneath it. Once you're at this stage right here, these larger trees are now at risk if a ground fire comes along or Smokey the Bear's motorist goes and flicks a cigarette out the window. These trees catch on fire and the fire climbs right up all the branches. These are the ladder fuels. And then you're at risk of catching the crowns of the redwoods on fire. You have a crown fire and big disaster, and you destroy the whole system. So if this is what they looked like before, that was somewhat in ecological balance. This was a harmonious, sustainable system. This has been a very healthy, very sustainable system for thousands of years, as is evidenced by the age of these trees. So episodic fire is okay. So if we go ahead and we take a place that looks like this and we disturb it, we imitate a natural disturbance and have it look like that. That's perfectly normal, perfectly fine. It's ecologically sound, and we can do that. If you look at this, we can go into this system here and we can remove material imitating fire, and we can remove material that generates a cash flow. And a good time to go into a system like this to do a removal is, oh, say late October into November, just before holiday season, when the holiday greens market and Christmas trees market starts going through the roof. If you have a piece of property that's in this region, you can manage specifically four Christmas trees and greens and so on. We'll talk a little bit about that later as well. So what do you think happens in the grass? Okay, so when Europeans got there, there's all this grass underneath these redwoods. What happens when you have grass? It's a no-brainer, right? Of course, when you have grass, you will have grazing. and so hopefully you guys can see some of these opportunities here. Your place may look like this. You might think, well, there's no opportunities here at all. There's no agriculture going on here. There is no human food coming out of the system whatsoever. You might think that this is an ecological harmony. Well, and it kind of is, but not really, because those redwoods right now at this stage are at risk. One little match in there and that whole thing goes up in smoke, and you've just destroyed thousands of years worth of site development, soil development, etc. It's perfectly okay to go ahead and remove some of these trees, sell some for pulp, sell some for poles, teepee poles, Christmas greens, get the grasses established underneath, and now do some grazing. Well, prior to Europeans getting here, and it goes way, way back, of course, what kind of grazing was happening in these systems right here? This is the California floristic zone. So if you look at California floristic province, excuse me. So if you look at our pinyon regions, our pinyon was here, sugar pine was all through here, and now we now can have Italian pine going through here. So this is where the redwoods and the sequoias all are. Anywhere in that region right there, this is the kind of grazing that was going on at the time. Whoops, it looked like that. And this is the kind of the grazing that was going on. This is from a booklet that I got, or a small book actually, from the Rancho La Brea Museum in, I guess it's officially Los Angeles, the site of the La Brea tar pits. This is one of the first artistic rendering of what it looked like, and they chose the species in here from longhorn bison, saber-toothed cats. I forgot what kind of jaguar this was. This was not necessarily a lion, it's a jaguar. Numerous different equids, horse types. They were camelids, and of course the elephants, they were Columbian mammoth, primarily short-faced bear, dire wolf, an amazing array of wildlife in the savannas and right up into the redwoods, and they would circulate through here. They would come through the closer to the coastal plain, and then circulate back up and through into the redwoods as the seasons changed. So we can have a tremendous amount of animal biomass being raised in what people might ordinarily consider quote unquote forested areas. There's a lot of places in California that I've been to that look like this. It's young redwood. There's actually some quite old ones here, but there's quite a few people that I've worked with that have, like, 40 to 50-year-old redwoods. They're considered sub-commercial, meaning that they're small enough that you're not really going to get a lot of sawlog material out of it. They're a lower value than the bigger, larger, gigantic redwoods are, because they've grown faster. So when you got a piece of property like this, whether it's redwoods or pines or any other kind of tree growing anywhere, if they're sub-economic, most people kind of throw up their hands and they say, well, what do I do? Well, what I'm looking at when I'm looking at this thing right here, I'm thinking, all right, let's let these redwoods grow, but how do we get it to look more like this again? How do we get this to look like that? And how do we get this to look like that and earn some money in the meantime, hopefully pay some taxes? Good luck paying the property taxes in California if you have redwood property. That's a big issue. And remember, most people who are doing any kind of agriculture, IRS Schedule F is the tax return that you file. Most people who are doing any kind of farming are getting the majority of their income from something else. So what we want to do is we want to have our farming enterprise do the management on the property ecologically and not break the bank. And that's one of the wonderful things about restoration agriculture is the closer we get to a natural type system, the less it costs to maintain it. This redwood stand right here was maintained at $0 cost for thousands of years because they hadn't even invented dollars yet. I look at this picture right here. This is in the, I think it's called the Big Trees State Park, Calaveras, California. This picture right here just blows my mind because these two trees right here are redwoods. You know how they kind of line up? I'd like for you guys to hold in your mind this imagination of this row of trees. We've got a row of trees here. Well, now we can have an alley in between, and if we have sunshine in there, we can have grass. Now we can have a row of trees, an alley of grass. We can have grazing going on in here, our periodic mowing to imitate the fire. Look at the size of this person right here, and look at the size of this tree right here. Who knows what kind of tree that one is? That's a sugar pine. Sugar pine, I think the tallest sugar pine right now is in Yosemite. It's either in Yosemite or up here in Calaveras, like 250 feet tall. Gigantic trees, the largest of the 5 natal pines. Incredible, incredible trees. So let's use this diagram. We've seen this before. This shows like some gap dynamics we were talking about, how an old tree snaps off, and then there's a mini succession that goes on in the opening. But let's turn it back into that young redwood patch that we saw a few slides ago. I'll put a couple more trees in there. Let's say you buy, inherit, whatever. You have a piece of property like this. What can I do? I can't grow any food in here. It's like it's closed canopy forest. There's these redwoods that are up above everything. There's all these Doug firs coming up underneath. Maybe there's some sugar pines. Sugar pines are becoming more and more uncommon. What can I do with a property like this to produce some sort of yields and have a agriculturally productive piece of property? Currently, right now, places like this, we don't have any more places like that, really. Places like this are not producing any food. These are not agricultural properties right now, but they can be. They can be producing oodles and oodles of pine nuts. They can be producing all kinds of meat protein and other tree species that are associated with our pines. So let's pretend that we've got a property that looks like this. Let's go down and remember the few slides back of the big trees in Calaveras County. Let's mark trees in a row. Now notice the slope here. It's a higher elevation going down a lower elevation. This right here, I'm marking a row that goes into the computer screen. This is another one, into and out of the computer screen. Another one, into and out of the computer screen. Not rows left to right this way, but these are rows going across the slope. So any water that would flow down will now have the ability to intercept it here to hold it on the slope instead of having it all run downhill. Let's mark the trees, the rows of trees that we want to keep. It'll be all different species in there, and you might want to, be real careful, have different alley widths, because you're selecting the trees that you want to keep for a long period of time. And here I'm emphasizing the redwoods and the sugar pines. Redwoods just because, and the sugar pines because of the pine nuts. Let's now remove everything that was not marked. These were the trees that are marked. Let's remove those trees. Well, when we remove those trees, it takes effort to do so. It takes work. So let's remove the trees and let's get some yields from them when we do it. Wait a minute, it was supposed to be a thing. All right, so what we got for yields, obviously we got some timber out of it, and we also got greens that we would harvest, just before Christmas time. We could have some young seedlings that we pull up to pot up and resell, or just to sell bare root, whatever the case is. When we go in here and do an entry, we do everything that we possibly can to generate a revenue, because that will at least lower the total cost of doing this prescription on the site. Then we'll take whatever brush is left over, and we'll now make some brush barriers across the slope. Instead of excavating into the ground, into the soil, damaging roots, let's just take this brush and lay it across the slope, uphill from the trees. And what will happen through the years is needle fall and sticks and branches will all come down and migrate downhill, and you'll get these little mini compost piles filling in right here. My property up in Alaska, the only flat ground that we have on our property at all, we built by creating these brush barriers that went across the slope, and it caught leaves and needles, and just every time you walk, you'll end up making a little path here. Once we get animals in here, they'll start to make a path as well. Once we let the sun in through here, of course, we have an understory now. If it's a really deep, shady understory, let's say there were ferns that we saw in that previous redwood picture, we can sell ferns as floral, for floral arrangements. We can also dig up the ferns and sell them as nursery stock. And then we can seed grasses in here with some perennial native grasses that will be grazable by livestock. Here we go. These are some of the yields when we did that prescription. We harvested timber, some specialty wood, special knots and burls, firewood obviously, the Christmas greens, ferns, and the nursery stock from a whole wide host of plants, from trees to ferns and so on. These are some of the yields that we can get out of this system by doing this. So we've done work, but we've actually gotten some income out of the system. Then, this is obviously a rapidly aged photograph here, or whatever picture. This is the suite of species that companion with pines. The largest trees that dominate a site, they chemically change the site. They affect the soil biology of the site. They affect the soil organic matter of the site. And you cannot and will not live with these species of plants unless you are totally compatible with them. And so we will plant the compatible species, but not just every compatible species. If you want to do a purist ecological restoration, go right ahead and do that. This is a restoration agriculture project. We're going to focus on the economic species, the food species. These big triangles here, we can be planting sugar pines or Italian pines or pinyon pines, depending where you are. The other species, obviously, we've got our pine nuts. Cherries are compatible. Service berries, blueberries. There's even a native service berry here in New Mexico that ranges out through Nevada that can survive on like 12 to 15 inches of rain a year. It's pretty amazing. Blueberries are compatible with the pines. Hazelnut, and in the west of the Front Range of the Rockies, most of the hazelnut, the wild hazelnut, are beaked hazelnut. There's been virtually zero genetic selection done on that, so we have a huge opportunity for selecting and breeding improved cultivars of our native hazelnuts here in the West that are compatible with our sugar pines and our are redwoods. And anybody, anybody in California or any redwood country knows that blackberries are insane. They grow crazy out here, so they're a super useful plant. Currants are, there's actually a native currant. I've seen quite a few growing around here. Obviously mushrooms, and the forage, all of our grasses, and then we get our animals. What we've just done is we've taken a property that had zero commercial value and no annual cash flow by interacting with it and producing yields, these yields, to subsidize the cost of this conversion. We've now converted it from a closed canopy situation like this, a closed canopy, redwood, fir, whatever else is in there. We've now opened it up a little bit. We've gotten the grass back in there. We've managed our water a little bit. We've sold some nursery stock, and now we've planted all these edibles. We now have a farm or a ranch or whatever you call it. And now we have a farm that is 100% of these things are perennials. And it will be here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Well, not everybody gets a piece of property like this or can afford a piece of property like this. They'll be very expensive because they're very scenic and beautiful, according to most people. Well, oftentimes what will happen is a developer will buy this piece of property, or a timber company will buy this piece of property, and then do this. And this is where I got my start. Was up in Maine, was with clear cuts. Clear cuts are ugly. They're a mess. They're challenging to work with. But they're a wide open slate, and if you get them really soon after it was clear cut, there's a lot of legacy material still in place. The soil organic matter is still at previous levels, and you can immediately go right back in and start planting the species that were here before. Redwoods, for example, sugar pines, and so on. You can immediately go in and plant those. So what I did in Maine, and what I'm showing here for a redwood, sugar pine, pinon, Italian pine interface, the pine family, is go ahead and now that it's been clear cut, you're really not going to damage a whole heck of a lot. Let's get in there and let's do some swales and berms to manage our water. Let's get that water moving where we want it to go to, soaking it in where we want to soak it in, either spreading it out or concentrating, depending on our objectives on the site. Let's immediately get it grassed in with our native perennial grasses. So what this is stage one. We just got our clear cut, manage the water resource, and get the grass established. Now we can immediately have animals grazing on this within a year. So now we have a regular livestock operation, cattle, sheep, pigs, poultry. Try to avoid goats, because what we're going to do next is we're going to plant preferred goat browse, and you don't necessarily want to do that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set up the entire system right off the get-go. We're going to plant every single species that we're talking about right in the same row. A lot of people say, well, you can't do that. They're all different heights and stuff like that. Well, what's wonderful about all these plants with these different heights, a blackberry will only grow as tall as a blackberry plant will. A hazelnut will grow taller than a blackberry all by itself. Plums will grow taller than that. Cherries taller than that. And sugar pines taller than that. Redwoods taller than all of them. They'll sort themselves out by height over time. And because they're getting light from both sides, and because we're managing the system with pruners at this stage of the game, we're now going to favor the plants that we want to favor in this system. So we've planted all these different, all the different plant community plants that we've got thrown in there. A few years go by, things start to grow. One of the things that I stuck in here as well, notice I've got two different color evergreen trees in here. And I don't know which is which. You choose. One represents an evergreen tree, such as a Douglas fir. That's a later successional tree. It's more shade tolerant, but it has markets. We can start shearing them, or a silver fir, conkeler fir. Shear them intentionally for Christmas trees ahead of time, because you got plenty of sun here. You'll get good Christmas tree growth. So we have managed water. We have grass. we have all of the species that we talked about, the hazelnut. So we got hazelnuts, we've got blackberries or raspberries, we've got service berries, we've got cherries, we've got sugar pine. Now we have a reason to plant sugar pine in our system. And then as time goes on, the system matures. And this is exactly the same picture as the person who started with a closed canopy stand and went to agroforestry by removal. This was having a clear cut and getting to the same state by addition of species. And let's just quickly flip through these again, because I want you guys to see the difference. And this is the essence of restoration agriculture. We are indeed going to maintain and take care of a system like this. This is what we're creating. If we have a young stand that hasn't reached this level of maturity yet, we're going to help it get there. We're going to help these plants, our eventual canopy plants, to be healthier, more vigorously grown, and we're going to cash flow all along the way for thousands of years, either by removing material and adding additional species, managing our water, cherries, service berries, blueberries, hazelnuts, currants. Pick the ones you want. You may want to focus heavy on one and go lighter on another. That's all up to you. But these species here, these are the ones that are giving you the economic reason to take care of these longer-lived trees, the sugar pines and the redwoods. We now have an economic reason to take care of them instead of just sitting around and watching them grow for our lifetime and paying taxes on that. We can at least hopefully pay for the taxes. We can start with clear cuts and go the other way, kapoof, and plant the system in place. So where we end up with is that open, gladed, gigantic, large trees with grasses underneath it and some shrubs here and there. We have done very good ecosystem management. We have recreated and helped to maintain a healthy system instead of just let it go. Does that make sense to anybody? We are now right back to here. We have restored a system like this by two different methods, and we've been able to derive an income from that. Animals, of course, we've got to stick the animals in there somehow. Well, here's an example of a farm I've worked at. We're gonna kind of take a sidestep here. This used to be redwood. This is a property in north central California that it was completely covered with redwoods. They logged it all off, and because it was all during the it was actually silver, I guess, just to the west of here. It was all used for support timbers, for railroad ties, for everything, and then for export, obviously, to ship away. Redwood's an incredibly useful wood. The only thing that remains of the redwoods is they left this little patch of redwoods behind, and all around everything they just cleared it all off because it was all about animals. You got to have cows, you got to have horses, because back then, 100+ years ago, everything was done mostly with horses and mules, and the cattle were food and milk and so on. And some of these trees left behind were just simply enormous. The redwoods, however, don't really regenerate well in an early successional situation. Although they are adapted to fire, they would rather not go into a primary succession situation. They would rather have some succession occur, have some plants that have already done some site facilitation and made the site a little bit more favorable for the growing of the redwoods. And one of the things that the redwoods do and have done is they require a little bit more organic matter in the soil, and they create an amazing amount of organic matter in the soil. What is interesting, we can see underneath these redwoods, the level of where these trees are growing is 2 feet of soil collapse. Now, it hasn't eroded. This is a fairly dry area. I don't remember the rainfall on it. But what happens is when you don't have these trees pushing their roots all through the ground, inflating the soil using the roots, you put a little skinny root in and it gets fatter and fatter and fatter. It just kind of lifts the soil. All the needle fall. And as we've seen earlier on, successional processes, natural ecological succession actually creates the soil, creates soil thickness, soil depth, and increases the organic matter. Once you reverse that process, you can end up with soil collapse. So what happens here is on the lower spots, after they've grazed it for 100 years, they got some low spots. And what's interesting about these low spots is they're in collapse and they're sinking even deeper. So this soil has subsided, not in the same way like in Louisiana that the muck is settling, or in some places in California where they're sucking so much water out of the ground in the Central Valley that the soil is sinking. This is a biological collapse because of the short-circuiting of roots that inflate that soil. If we go to another picture here of this little system, oh, I guess it's not that picture yet. One of the things about soil organic matter is it's a huge biological sponge. A 1% increase in soil organic matter, the soil itself will store an additional 27,000 gallons per acre. I got this slide at the UN Climate Change Conference last December, and I like to use it a lot. And so one of the things that these redwoods have done is through time, they've created amazing organic matter soil that just holds all the water that lands on it. So it's just a super sponge that holds it all up. Whereas the grassland, overgrazed grassland, isn't able to store as much water. So the water puddles up in certain places because it can't infiltrate as quickly. It doesn't get absorbed by all this organic matter. It puddles. It creates anaerobic conditions here, which causes the grasses to die. And then the organic matter oxidizes further, and you get a sinking, a subsidence of the soil. It just gets lower and lower. Just amazing amount of biomass coming off here. I like to show this because here are these currents. One of the things about currents is they're a co-host to a white pine blister rust, which is a disease that affects sugar pine and white pines for that matter. Korean pines probably as well. And there were a lot of states once upon a time that banned the planting of any currants or gooseberries because they were the co-host of this disease. Well, they're native to this continent. They've lived with pines forever and ever and ever. And I just wanted to show this here with the pines as well. So here's a serious biological legacy, an amazing amount of water that could be stored in the system that isn't being stored in the system. So let's go ahead to this place that was formerly redwoods. We know it was formerly redwoods because we got a couple legacies here that aren't really regenerating. Let's manage our water. Start up here, up high at a key point up high. We'll start with a pond that way, and on this site I'm choosing to spread the water out to the ridges to more evenly distribute the water across this property. Now I've got the water soaking in. So now we'll have enough water to help keep these redwoods happy. There were redwoods there before, but we've had land that's been taken out of old growth redwood forest. Most of the organic matter oxidized away, and then it's been put in grassland, and it's been overgrazed by continuous set stocking with cattle, and the soil organic matter has withered away to almost nothing. And then, of course, we'll feed the pond up here. It's a good little graphic. We'll talk water again sometime. Now, in order to change the soil, look at these trees that are around here. We're in an earlier successional phase. This grassland needs to be invaded by some of the earlier successional plants, such as those found in the oak savanna complex. And look over here in this whole region, which is where we've been talking. If where we want to go is pines, sometimes we have to go through the oak family in order to get there. And so that's what on that previous site, this one right here, that's exactly what we've had to do. So to take an old growth redwood sugar pine forest and degrade it so much that it's pasture that's barely hanging on, that's back in successional time. Now backward and forward successional time is just describing the site development, the biological site development, the soil development of that site. And so this is backwards in ecological successional time to a previous state. And it can even get worse than that, which I'll show next. This diagram, this is really fascinating. I ran into this diagram in 1993, I believe it was, at the Alaska Energy Library where I was studying biomass for gasification systems way back when. This is from a report, a 1993 report to the EPA on oak savannas. This paper was written by um, John Haney and Stephen Applebaum. I'd met John Haney before, but when I read this, this is the paper that described that in the oak savannas, these are the species that you would find in descending orders as a permaculturist trying to figure out what to do. When I all of a sudden saw this species description of what you find in oak savannas, it blew my mind and it changed my life. Mollison changed my life and turned me towards permaculture. Stephen Applebaum and John Haney gave me specifics. They said, look at nature right here. Here it is. Well, when I was flying from Madison to Denver 2 days ago, yesterday, I guess it was yesterday. It was just yesterday. There's a guy sitting one seat in front of me, and he's got his computer screen open up, and he's looking through all of these different, he's looking at coastal Texas and Louisiana ecosystem types and by category and plant lists and species and all that. I'm having my mind blown. It's like, how am I so lucky is to sit next to behind a guy that I can spy over his shoulder. And then he went to the end of this report, and it's a grant application that this one particular company is applying for, and one of the authors was Stephen Applebaum. And as the plane landed and he closed his computer, he gets up, he'd looked at like several different research articles that I was reading as well. He closes his computer. I said, "Excuse me, would you happen to be Stephen?" And he turned around and looked at me and his jaw dropped. He's like, "Oh my goodness, yes, I am. How did you know?" So I just met Stephen Applebaum on the plane yesterday morning, and so we couldn't shut up after that. I introduced myself. He's like, "Oh my goodness, I'm supposed to meet you. Somebody told me to meet you." And we jabbered all the way off the plane. We jabbered in the airport for a while. He's going up to Alberta to work on a large project up there, and I'm coming down to this conference in New Mexico. So this is from John Haney and Stephen Applebaum, that diagram right there. This is a Rosetta Stone for the oak savanna. Think about this. Everything here produces income and food, a 100% perennial food system. This is a miracle. All of those same species exist in the California oak savanna, the New Mexican oak savanna, the European oak savannas. All these species are happy living in oak savanna systems, and they all provide us with food. Here's another site in California. This is actually down in this part of California, south-facing, very rocky, stony. Guess what kind of trees used to grow here? Yes, redwood trees. This was a redwood forest. The upper slopes were redwood, sugar pine, probably pinyon pine in this part of California. It was all cut off, allowed to grow up to grass. They grazed with grass. Fires would go through, all that sort of stuff. They grazed the dickens out of it. The grass started to peter away. The more drought-resistant plants, the thornier plants started to survive. And what can you guys notice growing all over here? Over the course of a little more than 100 years or so, human beings took this tremendously huge amount of biomass, tremendous organic matter in the soil, with grasses growing underneath it, a fabulous habitat, and degraded it so much that it's like a bunch of rocks and prickly pear cactus. That's way back in successional time. Now, remember, of course, when we were talking about inhibition, facilitation and inhibition, what happens oftentimes when you get into the brushy chaparral type scrub situation, these are very inhibitory of other species coming in. This can arrest succession and just kind of sit there forever almost, and the soil organic matter doesn't develop, the species diversity doesn't develop, it kind of stays in this depauperate state. Most of these plants are not even native. These are, I think it's Brazilian pepper tree, what they call it. So what do we do? Restoration agriculture. What are some of our options? Well, one of our options is to start harvesting nopales. We can start a prickly pear cactus farm and really get into prickly pear cactus. We have a sustainable business that can use this site right here. I personally would like to upgrade things ecologically and increase the species diversity, increase the water holding capacity, increase the oxygen that we produce, increase the quantity of food that we produce on this site. And so instead of just harvesting prickly pear, that's one option, perfectly fine. It's ecologically sound. You can plant sisal out there, dragon fruit, other different super drought tolerant species. Or we can do what this guy did, this family did, manage your water. Get out there, put your swales and berms in, pocket ponds where you need to have your ponds located. These are put in, I believe, this is 60-foot widths between swales on this particular system. There's the Pacific Ocean right there. Very hot. It's the south-facing California coast. It's not west-facing at all. South-facing. It's cooked. And this, of course, is soybeans. They grow, a crop of soybeans maybe every other year out there. This family is totally getting screwed because taxes are going through the roof because of development. I don't know how many great-great-greats goes back, but it was one of their ancestors got the grant directly from the King of Spain for this property. And it's been in the family, was out of the family for a couple hundred years, but the great-grandparents of the people who live here now bought the property back. So it was only out of the family for 2 generations. You know, this has been owned by this family since like the late 1500s. It's crazy. So here I am standing at this one particular swale. This is this is an old road that goes up the hillside. This swale actually grabs water off the road and brings it out across the broad face of the hill. But I'm looking to see my shadow here, taking a picture right up here, because this is one of the secrets of how we're going to get this back to redwoods over time. This right here is that patch of trees. You go right up to the top there. There's a road cut that goes across here, and up here is where they host weddings and workshops. Amazing, amazing oak savanna. Look at all the leaves we see here. The organic matter is through the roof compared to out in the baked desert, prickly pear covered place. Trees with some kind of fruit. There were honey locusts out there, and just these several different gigantic oaks. The oaks are actually regenerating up there. Big, huge old hollow tree here. Sometimes we have to go through the oak savanna phase to get us further along to the redwood phase. So here's that system there. This was installed last year just before winter, and hopefully they were going to get some El Nino, and they did. They want to soak in their 2,700 or 27,000 gallons per acre. Here's their keyline rip lines. They set this all up in the fall, get the swales and berms in place, get the subsoiler in there. Now this site is absolutely ready for rain. They broadcast seed on it, and they're going eventually back towards redwood sugar pine, but it's going to take 1,000 years to do it. They got the rain. I got maybe total of 3 inches of rain last winter time, so it was hardly a booming El Nino, but an El Nino it was. Let's talk about succession a little bit again, and I mentioned soil collapse and how once you start to degrade a system, the degradation can continue on its own. We can do the initial insult, and it can get worse all by itself. This word right here, one of my favorite words, pollutification. It's not pollutant or pollution. It's thermal erosion. Black spruce is very common in the northern parts of the country, Washington State, all across the Canadian border, all up through Canada, Alaska, Siberia, so on and so on. I put this diagram here because it shows that succession isn't like a straight linear pathway. It goes around and around and around and around, and it can circle around all over the different places. Balsam fir, for example, this would be on eastern and northeast, so eastern Canadian Maritimes, Maine, higher elevations in the Appalachians. What happens here, if you guys go back afterwards, look at this on archives, you just see that black spruce over time on drier sites will kind of give way to jack pine. Um, Medium sites will have a lot of aspen that comes in, paper birch. The wetter sites will kind of stay in black spruce, and fire kind of moderates this whole thing. All of these are fire related. These all have very light windblown seeds. Jack pine has serotinous cones that open with the fire. If you go longer periods of time with no fire, on the drier sites, you'll have more white spruce. And in the eastern parts, longer time with no fire, you'll have balsam fir. Also in the east, that what will start to come up underneath balsam fir will be hemlock. And as we've seen before, the fir are more adapted to very windy sites, and they'll do a lot of snapping to release hemlocks, for example, in the understory. So succession isn't a straight line. It goes all over the place. And I briefly wanted to touch on this because I showed that picture in the redwood where those wetlands, it was obvious by the types of vegetation that was there around those little wet spots. It was obvious that that wet spot was created by soil collapse. And I'll show a couple of different pictures of that soil collapse. This is on the way to my place up in Alaska. It's 280 miles northeast of Anchorage. You hike half a mile down to a river, you cross the river, you portage over a little, like 180 feet of land or something, you paddle up through 2 lakes, and then you go through this bog. Well, the lakes are actually muskegs, and they're created by paludification, which is thermal erosion. By the way, as you hike in this valley, 3+ miles, 4 or 5 miles, then you go up the side of this mountain up over here. My cabin is right up over there. The view from the cabin looks out off that way. It's about 3,500 feet up the side of the mountain. And what has happened here is that people have driven with their four-wheelers. This is all permafrost country. The four-wheelers would eradicate the vegetation. Now I've got this black peat soil exposed. It heats up faster, obviously, when the sun strikes it. Well, then the permafrost begins to melt. Well, then the water from the melting permafrost, it can't soak in because it's frozen underneath, so it makes a puddle on the surface, which is now like a lens, and it focuses even more sunshine through it. So the black soil melts the permafrost, which now starts to create some water, which now melts more permafrost, and these puddles get bigger and bigger and bigger. This originally was a nice, soft, mossy path when I first got there in 1985. And as of 2 years ago anyways, they've got this it's like 45-foot wide, massive mud bog puddle crap. And what will happen is in this permafrost area, that puddle crap will continue to expand. Whoops, what happened there? Gotta go backwards and forward. A different way, so that's paludification, that's thermal erosion that causes that. The place in California where the redwoods were is similar to what happened here. This is an almost perfectly flat field in Viola, Wisconsin, or it was perfectly flat prior to this summer. We had the wettest summer on record. We had about 1 inch of rain per week, every single week from like the beginning of June. Then from beginning of September into the middle of October, we had 600-year flood events in 5 weeks. The town was underwater several different times. This field never, the river, Kickapoo River is right over here. This was a lake easily for a month and a half. Well, what happens is grasses that require aerobic soil, they can't survive, so they die. Well, when they die, all of a sudden their roots obviously are dying. They're in the soil. It's anaerobic. You get an anaerobic decomposition that tends to push things in a more acidic direction. As the water receded, certain areas had already gone into collapse. There was an anaerobic decomposition of the organic matter in the soil, and the soil sunk, literally sunk. And as it sunk, the puddles stayed concentrated, and the sinking continued. And then what happens around it, the soil is totally acidified, and only the grasses that really tolerate acid conditions are here. So what just happened here is because of waterlogging in this situation here, this could be turning toward a bog situation in the temperate zone. I hope I'm going in the right direction again. So this is more the dead grasses here. Totally changed the soil chemistry, totally changed the soil biology. It's going to take a lot of work to recover from that ecologically if you want to upgrade it successionally. That's exactly what has been happening here. There's a lot of these different sedges and reeds that have come up. It's that same kind of anaerobic soil collapse. So if you're ever going to be driving on your property, try to avoid driving on fields when it's wet, because you can set up soil collapse. And that acidifies things and makes things less productive. Sounds like Wayne came back on. Back to Alaska. I'm going to flip through these last slides quick. Let's do the same pine family-based family of species that we talked about, because remember we talked about Siberian pine. This is the bog coming off the lakes. That's my wife Jennifer, my oldest son Eric when he was only that big. That's our dog Hoover carrying his backpack, and Maggie out in the lake. Notice all these leaning trees next to this lake. This is a muskeg that was caused by some sort of disturbance, and then the pollution, the thermal erosion, causes the edges to melt, and the trees lean over, and eventually fall in and expose more black dirt, which melts the permafrost. Well, these aren't very deep lakes. Eventually, some different emergent weeds can grow. They grow, they die, and they start to build the organic matter layer back up, and it will eventually turn into a meadow and then be colonized again by trees. So this cycle goes around and around and around and around. Of course, the whole thing could burn and be gone real quick. So this is heading into our valley. This is now up at my cabin site. There's the neighbor's house right there. That's Steve Farmer. He's probably not listening to this right now. But what I want you to look at is these places that look kind of bare. They're not bare. They're covered with a very low, brushy, small shrub. These are white spruce up in the higher elevations, drier elevations. So we've got white birch that we could tap for sugar. We've got white spruce, which is analogous to Siberian pine in Siberia. They would have, instead of white spruce like this, they do have white spruce. They would also have the Siberian pine. All of the red and maroon that you see, all of the places that look bare back here are covered with low bush blueberries. There are millions and millions and millions of acres of low bush blueberries all through the North Country that are not being harvested by human beings. So on private property, we now have an ecological model here. We have the far northern thing. We could be doing a Siberian pine. We can keep our birches in here. And we've got our blueberries, 3 right there. Well, there's more than just 3. Here's this is a view from my bedroom window in the wintertime. What's fascinating about that right there is sun. That's noontime on December 21st. This is the winter solstice. In the wintertime, the sun goes for about 3.5 hours of light where we're at. So these trees can handle an amazing amount of cold, an amazingly long winter, in a very, very short season, and still produce crops. That's amazing that we can go here and we can actually farm here. This is where I learned how to farm restoration agriculture style. That's how I would move in the wintertime. This is Hoover and Maggie pulling the sled, pulling a big load of gear, and little Eric is in a bundle, and there's Jen sitting on there cuddling Eric. And this is taken at 35 below zero, and notice I'm only wearing a slight polypropylene shirt. You get used to it. Here in Santa Fe, I can tell who the locals are because they're wearing winter jackets. I'm running around in shorts. This is beautiful here. So that's wintertime. There's our first cabin, just a little 20 by 20 pyramid. So this is the type of climate that we were able to grow a considerable amount of our food, and this is the miserable surroundings that we had to look at day in and day out. So, overstory, Siberian pine. Siberian crabapple and other different apple varieties. There's a lot of far northern apple varieties. Oriole is one of them. Norland is another one of them. A lot of research being done out of the University of Alaska Fairbanks on different fruit tree varieties. They all have to be on Siberian crabapple rootstock. Siberian peach shrub, Caragana arborescens. Some of you folks up in the middle Canada, I know there's a lot of, I think Montana, it's not legal to grow there anymore because it's considered invasive. But it's a nitrogen fixer, and it makes a high protein bean plus wood and you almost can't kill the stuff. I mean, it makes its own fertilizer. It's an incredibly useful plant for animal feed or for human feed. Hazelnut. I've got hazelnuts growing up in Fairbanks from some of my genetics here at New Forest Farm in Wisconsin. Raspberry is an understory, common up there. Rosehip, service berries. Service berries grow like crazy. Saskatoon's in Canada, that's the largest commercial production of service berries in Canada. Highbush cranberry, if you don't mind the smell of a wet dog, that's what it smells like when you cook them, and it is a big seed in the middle of the fruit, so you cook them down, and the flavor is nothing that sugar won't cure. There's Nanking cherry, is a bush cherry with a fruit about the size of my ring finger fingernail. Mulberries, Cornelian cherry, it's actually a dogwood. An amazing array of species. We can now be doing restoration agriculture in the far north, high altitude. I'm right below tree line at this particular spot. We can farm, we can do restoration agriculture. Of course, we can raise animals. Blueberries, crowberries, bearberries, lingonberries, haskap's, all of those grow really well in these situations. The bearberry and crowberry, for example, they'll grow right up here in the alpine zones, alpine tundra zones. And so it's time to restore the entire planet's ecosystems while feeding the world, and we can do it in an ecologically sound manner. We can live a good life. It doesn't matter where you live, there are plant communities that will feed you. Those are the magic plant communities that we imitate. If you imitate your local natural plant communities, you have the most chance of success where you are. And now you use your livestock and your brain and manage the system through ecological time and maintain it in a state of vibrant ecological health. And that middle age graph, we saw the S-curve 2 different weeks in a row. If we keep it in that middle fast-growing age class, they're going to be growing faster, producing more, and cycling more photosynthate, producing more food for us. It's time to do this at scale, everywhere, and that's why I'm here every Wednesday night, and that's why I'm here in New Mexico, and that's where I go, because this is not funny anymore, people. We have to feed the world, and we can do it in an ecologically sound manner. We don't have to all sit down, lay waste to the planet's ecosystems, and eat corn and beans. So with that, I will close it for the evening.
You've got some amazing questions here, Mark. Probably some good ones to answer. And then, Mark's at a conference, and he's going to be talking all day tomorrow and a little bit of the day Friday also. I want to have him preserve his voice a little. You can see mine is raspy. Give in some other, if you got a few other questions, throw them in, but we probably already got 20 on here. I'm going to make sure that he gets those answered. And then the rest of you, if you want to throw them in. Put on here, if you don't mind, some of you, where you're from. We didn't do that at the very front end, just so we get an idea of that. And then throw in some ones if you like this. Everybody, that was especially the way he ended it tonight, amazing. So anyway, let's get to the questions. Here are some, they're really good ones. Here we go. This is a really good one. Where might we find clear cuts for sale? Mark will really get creative.
Oh my gosh, anywhere they have any kind of timber industry around. Go to the real estate agent's office and say, hey, look, I'm looking to buy clear cuts. And then you just keep asking around, and they'll send you to somebody, because real estate agents, how they work is that if they get a referral fee. If they know somebody who deals in clear cuts and stuff like that, you talk to one real estate agent, they'll send you on to the next one. And if you buy that property from the second agent, the first one gets a cut of it. Talk to your real estate agents, and whoever asks that question, wherever you are. If you're from Kansas, there's probably not a lot of clear cuts in Kansas, but everywhere else they're for sale, and they're cheap. They really are.
Actually, it was amazing because 3 people asked it right in a row when you were talking about that early on.
Oh,
cool. Eric threw a funny one in. You can give an answer, but he says, where can I find some of those 20-foot ground sloths for my seed?
So. Well, that's a whole different set of conversations, and I think I talked a little bit about it when I talked about all the Western Hemisphere camelids, vicunas, alpacas, llamas, and so on, and then the Bactrian camel, dromedary camel. It's called backbreeding. Actually, they're working right now on backbreeding toward the auroch, which is the gigantic prehistoric European bovine. You just breed all of these current animals backwards, so you probably have to start with tree sloths. Sure, we've lost a few of the traits, I'm sure we have, but let's start breeding back towards bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger sloths. Might take a while. That's your job, whoever asked that question. Start breeding sloths. Yeah.
Eric comes up with great ones. He's in the Northwest also. All right, here's one. This is from Sue, one of our New Zealanders. What width of alleys would you recommend for the redwood, pine, etc. system?
Well, once again, I don't necessarily recommend. What
I told her that. I gave her a written answer.
What we want to do is we want to look at that system, evaluate it, and design it based on our objectives. One of the things with a system like that, there's a lot of, and I'm thinking right now to some clear-cut research. When you're doing redwoods or Douglas firs, I guess the one that I'm remembering most, they were showing that if you have a clear-cut that is 2 times the height, it's the width of this clear-cut is 2 times the height of the tallest mature tree, you would still be able to maintain somewhat interior type soil, and the seed from around it would go in and colonize it. So if you have like 60-foot tall trees, if you have 125 or 120 foot wide alleys, they'll still be able to seed in there, and you'll still have effects from those trees on either sides. That's just one piece of research. Does it work? I don't know. What type of alleys would I really recommend is what kind of equipment are you going to use, and make it in multiples of 2 times your equipment width. If you're going to be doing it mechanically, take the most critical piece of equipment, which in most places I go, it's a pull-behind hay bine that's offset from your tractor, and as you take a left-hand turn, it swings wide to the right. As you take a right-hand turn, it pulls in behind you. So design it around your equipment, whether it's a wheelbarrow or a tractor or what have you. Just understanding that if you go wider than 2 times the eventual mature height of that tree, it won't necessarily reseed naturally into the middle. You may not care if it reseeds naturally in the middle if you want grass. But remember also, for good grass growth, we want to have between a 30 to 60% shade. So we want to have some shade in the middle of your alley so we get a more vigorous, healthy, lush grass. So all those different things come into play there. So that's why I can't necessarily recommend anything, but these are the factors that I think about. The tree height, the equipment that I'm going to be using, grass growth, shade, water, what type of animals, and so on.
I'm laughing because I wrote her an answer, so it shows I've learned a little bit. Sue's going to have to tell me. I actually said a little bit of what you said, and said you really need to look at your own situation. But then I actually did say something about the heights of the trees. I didn't give the specific equation you did. But all right, let's keep going. When you were talking about stacking the tree and shrub crops on top of each other, can they still be harvested by machines? This is Stephen asking.
You would have to design it specifically. There are side harvesters that will do some of that, so you're going to have to look into some of the equipment. You may want to have certain offsets from that main row, but if you look at like apples in the US, those are hand harvested. If you're going to look at something like cherries, those are mostly shaken and swept, and so you can still get a shaker in there. Many of the nut trees, walnuts, and pecans are shaken and swept as well. All that you'll miss are the ones that are right in the middle of the row that fall right in there that you can't go by with your sweeper. And so that's why you turn in your pigs after you're finished harvesting, and they'll clean up all the nuts that you didn't get out of it. So that's a design consideration. My oldest son, Eric, that you saw when he was really little like that, he was 5 years old, and he said, "Hey, Dad, I just invented an apple picking machine that will pick, from one side of the apple trees." And he described it to me, and I drew a picture of it until it matched the picture in his mind. And I bet you it would work. We've never built it, but this little 5-year-old kid came up with that idea, and it would be perfect for a polyculture species row. Then there's a guy in Illinois, I think it was, an engineering student who designed a straddle harvester with curb feelers that would drive along harvesting shrubs. And then if there's a tree that comes to, like, so if you got hazelnut under chestnut, for an example, when it touches the chestnut, the curb feelers go back, hit a switch, the machine unbuttons these two things, clamps, let go. It goes around the tree, then the curb feelers in the back, hit the tree again, open it up, and it closes as it goes around the tree. So it'd be able to go down the row, harvesting the bush, and going around the trees, unzipping itself and putting itself back together again. So that's all design, and then it's mechanical engineering after that.
Okay, awesome. This is one that I know you'll love. Question about growing hazels with acid-loving pines and blueberries. Is this something you have found would yield good productive plants? I read that hazels do best at a pH of 6 or higher.
And so probably what you've been reading is information that's come from Oregon, and they're using mostly European hazel. And evidently, you've never seen hazelnuts growing in the full shade of I've seen hazelnuts growing in the full shade of pine forest. I've got several different presentations that show it up in Maine. And in California, they're an understory shrub with redwoods. Wicked acid, I mean, as acid as orange juice. So part of the situation is, if we're looking at the university research, they're researching things in controlled environments. They try to cut out all of the variables, and they study one factor and says that that's the rule. They study a specific set of genetics with a specific set of cultural practices, and it's very, 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 very precise. And nature didn't read that research. So I've got hazelnuts growing, like I said, right in with pines. I see them underneath redwoods all the time. It's an issue of genetics and an issue of cultural practices, how you're going to take care of those plants. So I don't know how to answer it other than that.
And that was one of our regulars, Sam. I'm sure he will not be offended by anything.
Oh.
Lynn, up in the North Country, always has good ones. Can you reverse or stop polutification on permafrost area?
Yeah, what's fascinating about permafrost areas is I've actually experienced stuff that's somewhat different than some of the research that I read. I've seen areas, what I've done on my hillside up in Alaska is where I planted a lot of evergreens, and I was planting mostly Siberian pine and a lot of white spruce. I planted a lot of limber pine, which doesn't make as big of a seed, but still grows up there. As the pines grew in over this area, now the ground was completely shaded, and it created a patch of permafrost. So what I've read is that the dark color of the spruces actually increases the heat. But what I've observed in Alaska is underneath the aspens and underneath the birch, where the leaves fall off, that ground is where it tends to go permafrosty. Also, of course, naturally, wet spots will go more permafrosty. I mean, the underneath the birches and aspens doesn't go permafrosty because it's getting sun, at least in the springtime of the year. It gets sun and it melts deeper. So I did it through shade, and then what really solves the problem, I described it a little bit long term, is the eutrophication and the natural succession of the aquatic ecosystem, which, you know, I don't know if Wayne has touched on that on any of his aquaculture systems, is that aquatic ecosystems go through their own succession, and they eventually will fill in and turn into meadows. And then once it's a meadow, now it goes through secondary succession and goes toward whatever forest type is around it in that particular area. So shade can help that, or eutrophication and aquatic succession.
Yeah, I'll just comment quickly. I was going to throw in something when you were showing some wetland areas, and you were talking about sedges in an area where there had been some, a bog situation. You can also do the reverse, which is you look at some historic thought, you look at the area and maybe what your needs are, and you could create an aquatic system without a lot of heavy equipment, a lot of others, and actually turn the successional process backwards and if it's a benefit for you, if you might want to be doing something with an aquatic system that would then add additional value to your terrestrial system that surrounds it.
And that, keep going, Wayne.
And that was the slide. You just went past it.
But this is the one that I wanted to show that explains exactly that. Succession is not linear. It goes around and around and around and around. There's a million different pathways that you can take. Which one, in this particular system here, which one works for you? You may want this bog situation to go on. I've planted wild rice in that very bog that you saw. It's not native to there, excuse me, it is a few hundred miles south. In this bog right here, that bog right there, there's now wild rice growing there. Why not? So if you got pollutification going on, plant some wild rice. What will happen is over time, the wild rice will grow, the stalks will fall to the ground, to the bottom of the water. They'll eventually decay, they'll fill it up. It'll form a peat type thing. You'll get a peat bog, and then eventually the trees come in, you'll have black spruce bog. You'll be back to here again another 100 years later. You'll be back at a black spruce bog.
Yeah.
So the successional system goes around and around and around and around and around and around and around.
By the way, there were two people, Mark, that said, and by the way, if anybody ever makes these comments about, hey, this isn't graduate level, two people said the lights went on because of that right there with them that have said, I've been doing farming, doing agriculture, and this was it hit it for me. I saw it. So this one you've talked about before. Alyssa's become a wonderful regular, and she said you mentioned Siberian pinyon sugar. What about Korean pine? Alyssa, he's talked about Korean pine. You might want to just mention it now, but she just is there any particular reason to not mention it? But you really have talked about it.
Last week, I spent most of the time on pinyon and Korean pine. Anywhere the white pine grows, eastern white pine, Korean pine is for you.
Yeah.
I just went further west. Then I went to the dry. Then I went up the coast, and then I went far north this time.
You can go back, Alyssa, and see that one. Let's see. You mentioned cherry, service barriers, etc. grow together with redwood, fir, pine forest type. What kind of agricultural species exist in an oak maple forest? You know, Adam, again, I know he's addressed this one. Remember, he's the same comment. I'm just trying to save some time here because there's a bunch more. Go backwards. There's 15 sessions where Mark's talked about.
But also think again about oak and maple. That's a specific phase in time that we've had these oaks that are fire adapted and sun dependent, and now they've been undergrown and intergrown with maples. Where do you want to go? Do you want to go more late-term succession, so it's mostly maple, yellow birch, basswood, beech, or do you want to go more towards the oak side, which is oak, chestnut, apples, cherries? You choose where you take it in successional time. You can either go forward in successional time, which is towards late succession. That's your shade tolerance, your maple, basswood, beech. Eventually, they'll fall over and rot. You'll get eastern hemlock and all that kind of stuff. Or we go back in successional time to the oak savanna type situation. Either way is ecologically sound.
Broad question, real good one. The Homestead Act is dead. Where do I get land like that? He's talking about your land in Alaska.
The Homestead Act is not dead. There are homestead parcels available in Minnesota. There's homestead parcels available in Michigan. Michigan has special enterprise development zones where you can buy land for $1, and it has no sales tax for however many years it takes for you to run your business. Alaska has homestead land that's still available. You have to be a resident, and it's a lottery system to get drawn. When I was up there, I had gotten a parcel on Kodiak, on the western side of Kodiak. Port Larson was the nearest place, and unfortunately, I couldn't prove up on it. It cost me like $5,000 just to get to the doggone place. And so it's still alive and well if you want to do that. And here's another thing that's almost as good as the Homestead Act. America is aging. There is a demographic of people now that have property that desperately want somebody to take it over. They have no heirs, for example. They want somebody to take it over and run it and manage it. You can step into those situations. There's two sisters that I just did a consultation with them a month ago in Pennsylvania. They're in exactly the same situation. The property's been in the family since 1659, I think it is. And now there's no more heirs. What do they do with this property? Because they've been told this myth, there's all these young people who want to get into the farming, and it's not true. There's land all over the place for cheap, for work your way into it, by clear cuts, the Homestead Act in very specific places. Got to look around.
There's a bunch more questions here, and I'm gonna actually call a stop tonight. There are some awesome ones. We'll get these answered for all you guys. Wow, there's got to be 50 more here. And you guys are awesome. I'll just mention a few people and we'll make sure you get back to you. Lan asks several more. Lan actually gives some great information. I'm going to put this Q&A up on the site along with the replay. So this will be up there. I'll either get Mark to answer these so he'll talk about them next week, or we'll just make sure he gets to them. I'm just looking through, just seeing, we got some new folks that are asking some great ones. Jason, Kate, Mason, Paul, Justin Quay. Justin has a really good one. HD, Hilton. Anyway, we'll get to those. Again, I've been about almost an hour and a half here. We really try to be helpful. Bill, you raised up a hand, which is to go live, which we asked to do that. We do those on Monday nights. Monday evenings, you can come and it's all question and answer and networking. And we've come up with projects last week and this week. We've literally helped, and it's we, not me, all the other people coming on live and just helping each other out. You guys together have more knowledge than all of us as instructors will ever have. All your own little special things. It's all neat. Anyway, I think we'll call it now. I'm going to stop the recording. Unless you've got something else, Mark, that you want.
I just do have one thing, Wayne. If you can just coordinate with Jeffrey and find out when I'd have time available just to do another Q&A session, or maybe we take our next week and just do Q&A instead of another presentation.
Right.
You make a call on that. I mean, I finally got my control panel back, and I just looked. There's like 1,000 questions on that thing. That's great. That's great.
It's a bunch. Let's do that, folks. Unless you know what, throw in some ones. And there's still almost, we have not everybody. There's a lot left, but throw in ones if you would like next week. This will help Mark. He then doesn't have to prep as much. To be a question and answer with Mark rather than him preparing. Look, it's all Mark. It's just one from everybody. Okay. So let's do that. Let's make next week Q&A. Guys, that's it. That's what we'll do next week. Wow. And by the way, that's the night here in the U.S. We got people from all over the world. That's the night before Thanksgiving. But that means you guys are off work, some of you, and stuff, so it'd be great.
No, we could spend 7 hours doing it. It'll be great. All right.
All right. Hey, man, I wish I could have been down there, but Jeffrey probably told you just a lot of stuff, and I needed to get ready for this, and then you had a great time. Mark didn't mention it. He's at the Biodynamics conference. It's sold out, by the way, and I wished I could be there. I actually was invited, but I'm only 6 or 7 hours away. But
and by the way, I did send my PowerPoint to you and Brian. If you can get that loaded as quickly as possible, the crowd grabber number, they won't get that till Friday. So if you have that crowd grabber thing